Welcome in, everybody, to the CFB Nation All-America podcast. My name is Bill Trocchi, senior editor at sportingnews.com. I'm joined, as always, by Bill Bender, our lead college football writer at sportingnews.com. Thank you to everyone for listening on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. We are cranking out one show a week all through the off season, and we have not missed a week since we started this podcast in August of last year. So that begs the question, Bill, are you tired of talking to me yet?
No. I was told yesterday on my Sports Good appearance by a friend that there's a phrase about a resting face that has gone around, and they say I need to work on my resting face while other people are talking. So I said, I'm not here for your amusement, I'm going to look however I get a look. So apparently I need to look happier on camera. I'll try today.
Hey, if your face needs a rest, it needs a rest, right?
I know, man. So, no, all good, but, excited about another week. I know we've got a lot of preseason content up at SN Irish Breakdown that we were going to talk about today. And, we've got an interesting topic today. I'm interested to get, excited, I guess, and my face will show it that I'm ready to get going.
All right. Yeah. So we are, heavily into the off season. We sit 10 weeks from week 0. The countdown continues. The Athlon magazines are out, the Lindy's, the Phil Steele, Sporting News. We used to have magazine for a long, long time in that space. Now our summer preview is basically online, and we've got an index at sportingnews.com. We've got the top 25 quarterbacks, ranking the coaches, Heisman hopefuls, top 25, all that stuff you'd expect to read in a summer magazine as we kind of wait for the fall kickoffs. Today, we're talking about the next team in each conference to make the college football playoff for the first time. Last year, of course, it was TCU who landed the surprise CFP bid for the first time and became the 14th school to reach the college football playoff, and notably the first from the state of Texas, as all the Longhorns and Aggies fans already knew. You have a piece, it's a little bit different, coming out on sportingnews.com on Wednesday, same day this podcast will be published. So it could be published before you are listening to this podcast. Tell me a little bit about that story and how it's a little bit different than what we're going to talk about.
Well, no. So every year we pick 5 teams that might make the playoff for the first time. Obviously, as you mentioned, it's an exclusive club, but I held myself accountable. So we did this list last year, and our choices were USC, Utah, Texas A&M, Baylor, and Ole Miss. So in order to hold myself accountable, instead of throwing that same dart every year and saying, well, this is the year USC is going to do it, or Utah, I picked 5 new teams, one from each conference. USC and Utah obviously would be my first choices. USC number 1 with a Heisman Trophy quarterback getting closer to the playoff. But this is a big year for them because it will be more difficult when they go to the Big Ten. They may not, in a 12-team setup even, it might be tough. So, and it's really the last year we can do this exercise in the 14 playoff. So I disqualified Utah. I disqualified Texas A&M, who honestly, Bill, as we get into this list, Texas A&M matches the TCU profile in terms of they're 5-7. They made not a first-year coach, but a first-year offensive coordinator, and they've got their hot quarterback to go with all the recruiting and the talent that they have. So if there was honestly a best answer for this exercise of which team would be this year's TCU, it's probably Texas A&M.
Wouldn't that be something, right?
Didn't Texas A&M striving to be TCU like we all thought they would?
Before we dive into our discussion, let's do a little Trocchi trivia centered on the college football playoff. What was the last college football playoff to have all 4 teams not making their first appearance in the college football playoff? In other words, all 4 had already been there before. So we will answer that one at the end of the show. Bill's going to ponder that for a bit. Obviously, TCU broke through last year, so you got to go back. What year did all 4 teams had been, veteran and making at least their second appearance in the college football playoff? So All right, so let's go through. Now, again, our exercise is what? It's who will be the next next team in each Power 5 conference to make their first appearance in the college football playoff. So we'll start in the ACC. Who will be next to join Florida State and Clemson as an ACC college football playoff team?
I think North Carolina is still the best answer. Even though in our article I put it's a toss-up for me between, and it's crazy that Miami's not my answer, but I would say North Carolina. They've got Drake May. They've had more talent come through there. They are picked third across most preseason publications. So if they were to break through, they've made an ACC championship game. But my long-term answer would probably be Louisville with Brom. I think the way he's used the transfer portal, what he did at Purdue, he's home and home fits. And the fact that I'm saying North Carolina and Louisville over Miami kind of speaks to the state of what's going on with that program and the pressure that the Hurricanes are feeling to get back on top. And that's really tough. But I think Mario can get them there. But I would go North Carolina will be my answer, with Louisville a close second.
My answer is Louisville.
Yeah.
I feel like North Carolina is not – they're not going to make the college football playoff this year when it's only a 4-team field. And I don't think there'll be a top 12 team once Drake May is gone. And I think he's going to be gone soon. And I think they're going to have a little bit of regression. So who steps up next to Florida State and Clemson? I think it's Louisville. I believe in Jeff Brom, as you do. I think he's going to get a top-flight quarterback in there, coach him into an NFL prospect. And he's got a history of success. He won 2 conference titles in 3 years at Western Kentucky. Took over a just dumpster fire at Purdue, treaded water for a little bit, came out of the pandemic, ended up winning 17 games in his last 2 seasons before leaving. Last time Purdue won 17 games in 2 seasons, 1997-98, when Drew Brees was playing quarterback. So Jeff Brom did some nice work at Purdue this year. He's got Jack Plummer rejoining him after a solid year at Cal. Now, again, I'm not projecting Louisville to be a top 4 team this year to get into the playoff, but they have a couple of young, interesting young quarterbacks on the roster. Harrison Bailey, who is borderline 5-star coming out of high school here in Georgia, went to Tennessee, couldn't crack the starting lineup, transferred to UNLV. Now he's going to work with Brom at Louisville. They've got Brady Allen, who signed with Brom at Purdue, who's now come to Louisville with him. Perhaps one of them develops into a QB that, could be an NFL guy, could get him into the playoff. Louisville, they spend money. They've had success in the past, and I just think if he starts to get it going, that place can be a madhouse.
Yep. Well, I think you're shortchanging North Carolina a little bit because they went from Sam Howell to Drake May. That's a little bit of a nice – if then in a year they're going to be able to say, hey, we've got 2 quarterbacks in the league, and Mac can sell that for a little bit. Will they be able to continue that without Phil Longo? That's another question.
Right.
But, again, we just spent 5 minutes on this, and Miami's not the answer, which is kind of shocking in some ways.
Right. They got to prove it. All these teams have to prove it. That's obviously part of the discussion. So we can move on to the Big Ten. Who will be next to join Ohio State, Michigan, and Michigan State?
Penn State's the easy answer, and I'll stick with it. If they don't do it this year, they'll get in the 12-team playoff, I think, with the talent around Drew Aller. 2 good running backs this year. It is a all-in year of sorts, as I mentioned in the article. This will be the 9th, assuming Penn State's in the top 10, which I do believe they will be. It'll be the 9th time since they joined the Big Ten that they'll be in the top 10 to start the season. So expectations are very high. The year 1999 is getting mentioned a lot, but I'm quick to point out that team, as good as they were with LeVar and Courtney Brown and the hype around them, they didn't win. They lost to Michigan. So the pressure is on Penn State. My second sub answer, I won't even give it because I want to hear your answer first, and then I'll say who my runner-up was if it isn't your answer.
The next Big Ten team to make its first college football playoff appearance, will be USC.
Okay.
That is my answer. That is my answer. The logic behind the answer. USC does not make the playoff this year. And then once it gets to a 12-teamer, they'll be in the Big Ten. Now it's a contest between USC and Penn State. If Penn State doesn't make it either. Which program is on more solid footing? It's kind of a toss-up, but I've given the edge to USC. Lincoln Riley's been there 4 times. James Franklin has yet to get there. I don't love the extra travel that USC is going to have to do. I don't know how they're going to figure that out. Maybe they adjust. But, you know, he's just got a history, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he's, you know, getting great quarterback recruits. He's going to have, you know, Williams could be the number 1 pick in the draft. You know, I don't think they're in position to make it this year just because their defense needs so much work. They were 106th in the nation last year. So I think it's going to be USC, reserving the right to change my mind if Drew Allo throws 5 touchdown passes against West Virginia in week 1.
Well, and here's my other school that needs to be mentioned, and I always pull this stat out to people, and the school with the best record, Power 5 school with the best record in the playoff era that has not made the playoff is still Wisconsin.
The Badgers.
Yes, they are behind. I pulled it up. That's why I was typing. I wasn't ignoring you. Alabama, Ohio State, Clemson, Georgia, Oklahoma, Notre Dame, if you count them, then Wisconsin. 83 and 32 in the playoff era. New hire in Luke Fickell, great quarterback coach. I talked about Phil Longo earlier.
Tanner Mordecai. We talked about him last week. I got Tanner Mordecai in the Heisman Trophy race.
So my pecking order would actually be Penn State, Wisconsin, USC if I was picking this, because I think it's coming with Luke Fickell. I think they're going to be very good very soon. And if Wisconsin played USC this year, USC would probably win. If they played next year in a Big Ten setting, and I don't know if they do. That's lazy on my part not to look on the Big Ten schedule. But when they play the first time in the Big Ten, I think it's going to be a toss-up.
Interesting. Because, I mean, you open this whole show by saying USC and Utah were the two closest to the college football playoff.
Right. But I'm saying this is down the line. This is this year with Caleb. But this year with Caleb, these are 2 different questions. It's like, if I had to pick one school this year to make the playoff, and well, we haven't done the Pac-12 yet, so I'll go back to defending USC. But if I was taking a long-term bet, it's kind of the same thing with that's why this question's hard, because I bet you I have let's go do the Big 12, and I bet you I have a weird answer for this one too.
Who will be next in the Big 12 to join Oklahoma, TCU, and Cincinnati?
I would say, if I was bold enough to say Texas, because it's a 1-year bet, that I'm going to say Texas is going to win the Big 12 and go to the playoff, that should be my answer. But the amount of 1-score losses that they have prevents me from doing that. So a team that is actually in the Big 12, going to be in the Big 12, and it's probably going to happen in the 12-team playoff era, I would probably go Kansas State.
Okay.
That's my answer, because I think they're poised. They've gotten better every year. Chris Kleiman's doing a great job. They went to they got their New Year's Day Six Bowl reality check from Alabama. That's fine, but they still won the Big 12. Mm-hmm. They still have a system. Bill Snyder was steady at Kansas State for years. So absent Oklahoma, Texas, and we go into the new Big 12, depending on who's in that, my answer would probably be Kansas State.
Well, we know who's in it.
We do. Well, we don't, because Colorado? Yeah, like we do, but we don't. Like, right? So, like, can I say, how much bonus points would you give me if I said Colorado?
Right.
So
San Diego State. No.
Right. But we don't get that cute here on the CFBA Nation podcast. Interested to hear your answer on this one.
I thought about Kansas State. I thought about Baylor, but I'm going to surprise you. BYU.
Okay.
That's BYU wins the auto bid for the Big 12 and gets in the college football playoff. That is my call as the next first team to to join, TCU and Cincinnati, Oklahoma for now, whatever. Yeah, I think safe choice is Kansas State. I think you're right. But I'm going BYU. Okay, so here's my case for the Cougars. They're back in a conference for the first time since 2010. They have had 17 winning seasons in the last 18 years. The last 5 years that they were in a conference in the Mountain West, they were 33-6. So they kind of rose to the top. They lived at the top of that conference. The Big 12 is a step up, obviously, but they're kind of an underrated, sneaky program, right? They maintained relevance despite having to go independent for a decade, which is not easy. They had a top 2 draft pick in Zach Wilson. This year they have Keaton Slovis at QB. He's got a chance to be drafted if he has a good year under offensive coordinator Aaron Roderick. He worked with Wilson and Jaron Hall, who was a 5th-round pick last year. So they start to get the reputation that they're producing NFL quarterbacks again, like they did way back in the day. This program always has a lot of physicality with those guys on the offensive and defensive lines. They go on those 2-year missions. They're kind of older than a lot of the teams that play. Sataki's a terrific reputation, high integrity guy, good coach, good energy. Their NIL situation, from what I can tell, it's fairly organized. Mm-hmm. They play in kind of a little bit of a weird stadium, whatever the altitude, and it's going to be, a challenge for some Big 12 teams to get in there. I think they can make a splash. I'm rolling the dice a little bit, but I think BYU is my pick.
They've been in the playoff discussion twice with Zach Wilson and then back to Taysom Hill. And, they kind of got their wish. I remember years ago talking to Bronco Mendenhall about that when he was the coach, that, about the process of getting into the Power 5, and they've earned that. I think they're going to be super excited about it. They have the biggest stadium in the Big 12 when they come in. So they're going to be kind of a heavyweight within the weight class. So that's a good pick, Bill. That's a
little curveball for you.
You've thrown a couple curveballs, but that one I like. I like that one. So very good pitch.
Okay. All right, let's move on to the Pac-12. Who will be next to join Washington?
Yeah, Washington's the only team.
There's not a long list of Pac-12 schools we got to get through that have already made it.
So you can't say Washington and Oregon. They're DQ'd because they've both made it, as far back as that seems.
Oh, and Oregon.
Oregon, yeah.
That's right. I did miss that. My mistake.
They're DQ'd. I'm going to just say USC, and I'm going to go with
So you're rolling the dice for this year?
Pretty much. If I had to rule, if you've given me the choice between, say, USC wins the Pac-12, goes to the playoff, finishes what they didn't finish last year, and throwing a dart at A, what the Pac-12 is going to look like, and B, somebody other than Washington and Oregon, I'll probably just take USC now and say, I've got a Heisman winner. I've got a coach that's been to the playoff 4 times with Oklahoma. It's always a funny bet right now, because if you have to bet, and I'm going to do our bowl projections soon. I think I'm starting to sketch them out tomorrow, but always one of my questions when you start to pick playoff teams is you go SEC champ, Big Ten champ, you put them in. Then you say, am I putting 2 SEC teams in? Am I putting 2 Big Ten teams in? Or am I putting an ACC champ, some combination of the rest of the Power 5? I'll probably put USC in there and just roll with that over 2 SEC teams. Like, would you put, if I submit this to you next week, and the one playoff is Georgia, this is for this year, Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, Michigan, or Georgia, Michigan, Ohio State, USC, which one are you going to have less questions about?
Probably USC.
Yeah, because it's if they go 12-1, they're in. So why not go with that quarterback and do it that way? So I'm going to go So I circled back to our first point in this conversation. That's why I think they're the closest to the playoff, and I'll roll with that for 1 year.
Okay. No, that's good.
And there've been an answer on here twice now for 2 different conferences.
That's right. They were my Big Ten choice, because I don't think they'll quite make it this year, but I think they will get in the 12-teamer, possibly with Penn State at the same time. So they could have a tie there, of course. when we expand. So Pac-12, my answer, because I don't think USC is going to make it this year, I'm looking down the line to the auto bid. You got to take Washington out of the picture. You got to take Oregon out of the picture. Who's left? Utah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
They've won the league 2 years in a row. They've been living near the top of the conference. The other schools have the potential to get up there, but I can't picture Oregon State getting there. I can't picture Arizona State getting there before Utah. Utah's got too much of a lead on those two programs. Kyle Whittingham's done, a terrific job and everything. And I just, I think the league will belong to Washington and Oregon for a little while. But eventually, if I had to pick a team that's going to get that auto bid that's outside of those two schools, I got to go Utah.
Right. Yeah. And yet another school that fits the TCU profile that if they went to the playoff this year, everybody would be doing a lot of Google searches is Oregon State. And they won 10 games last year. And can you imagine a scenario where DJ Uiagalelei takes Oregon State to the playoff and Clemson doesn't get in?
Right.
And they have talent at quarterback. They have their returning quarterback. They have a 4-star freshman at quarterback. They've built depth on both sides of the ball. They closed the season with a 2-week stretch against Washington and Oregon. And Jonathan Smith's done a great job. I mean, he was a guy when we did our coaching rankings that I took a little flack, probably deserved it, probably had him a little low.
I mean, his record isn't great, but you can clearly tell that they are on the rise.
They've done it patiently, though. And this may be their best team since 2000. So under Dennis Erickson. So they deserve to be mentioned in the conversation, but you're right. When it goes to the new Pac-12 as it stands, it's going to run through Oregon, Washington, and Utah.
Yeah. So, all right, SEC, who will be next to join Alabama, Georgia, and LSU?
It's a toss-up between Tennessee and Texas A&M to me, and I'm just going to go with the easy answer and say Tennessee, because I think last year wasn't a fluke from the standpoint that Josh Heupel's offense works. They may not average 46 points per game this year, but they're set at quarterback with Joe Milton, 5-star freshman behind him, 4-star freshman coming in behind him. So he's established the quarterback pipeline. They'll find skill position guys. One of the underrated things about next year is they have their top 3 running backs coming back. So as much as the air and the quarterback and the wide open receivers gets publicized, they've got a running game behind it. They're going to be very good.
I mean, they would have made a 12-teamer this year.
Right. So they were in the 4-team discussion until the end. And they probably would have, let's say, if they would have went 11-1, they might have got in.
Yeah, they got blown out by South Carolina. That was a problem.
Yeah, had they gone 11-1, and Ohio State was sitting there at the end, and we've already done that one, but they were close. So what it comes down to this year, they don't leave the state until they have one trip outside the state through the first 6 weeks. They go to the Swamp. They play at Alabama. That won't be easy, obviously. And then they get Georgia in November. If I would contend they could lose to Alabama, but that Georgia game is more important anyway, because they're not going to get to Atlanta without beating Georgia. So whether it's this year or 12-team playoff program-wide, out of all those SEC schools that are close, that haven't been there, and it's, you can't have LSU, Alabama, or Georgia, I think Tennessee's up next.
I mean, their one issue is they have Alabama and Georgia every year.
Right.
And Alabama and Georgia aren't going anywhere anytime soon. And those are 2 games you would figure they're going to be underdogs in every year. So to start off with 2 losses, even if it's a 12-teamer, it's not easy. That's something in the negative column for Tennessee. My guess, I got another curveball coming at you.
Oklahoma?
Texas.
No, they've already been Texas. So you're Oklahoma's already
Texas. Texas.
So Texas made this list, almost made it twice because I was thinking about the 1-year lease. Okay.
Texas. Right. They got a shot this year with the Big 12, but I think they need to wait till they get to the SEC, to the 12-team expansion, and then I think they will grab a spot. Sark is he's gathering talent, especially at quarterback. Mr. Arch Manning. I don't know, have you heard of him?
They've got a little bit of hype around him.
He's at Texas, and he's actually not even going to play this year. But they're not going to be in the top 4 this year, I don't think. But in the 12-team tournament, we could be talking 4 SEC teams, right? At some point.
Oh, I mean, yeah. So
the champ and 3 at-larges. And, I think Texas can get themselves into the top 4 of the SEC fairly quickly. That's not that big of an ask. Tennessee's obviously on the rise. So I think it's UT versus UT in this question. I'm going burnt orange over volunteer orange.
Oh, they're both good answers. And A&M deserves to be mentioned because they've been close. Had it been a 12-teamer in 2020, they would have been in. And, like you said, on any given year in this new format, we'll probably have at minimum 4 SEC teams, 3 to 4 at minimum. So I'm going to stick with the Vols, though, because I'm 1 year. I've got one more swing than you already because I'm getting one this year. If you're going to go Texas, they can't go out of the SEC this year. So, no, those are all good answers. This was we could add.
Let's review. Let's go back. So your ACC choice was North Carolina.
North Carolina. Write these down for fun, like to see.
I am. Mine was Louisville. All right. Your Big Ten was.
We may wait a while on that ACC answer. By the way, that may be like it might be a minute before either one of them get to the playoffs. Okay, Big Ten.
Big Ten, you took Penn State, and I took USC.
We'll tie in 2025.
The Big 12, your choice was K-State, which is very logical. I'm going BYU out of the blue.
That'd be a good one. That's a toss-up.
Pac-12, your choice was USC, right, this year?
Mm-hmm.
And then I took Utah. And then SEC, you've got the Vols, I've got the Longhorns. Fun. So we didn't agree on any of them.
That's good.
We have 5 different answers for the.
That's why that was
5 conferences. So
that's why that was fun.
Okay. So before we go, and before we revisit the trivia question, one topic I wanted to touch on that I know you do a lot of radio appearances across the country and talking about what's going on and whatever. And we reacted to it, a couple of pieces at sportingnews.com last week. Big Ten scheduling, the Flex Protect. Sounds like some sort of like roofing company that keeps your house dry or something. The Flex Protect. What are people talking about when they're asking you questions on these radio shows about the Big Ten's decision to, kind of go a little off the board here and not have a standard number of permanent opponents for each team?
Penn State not having a natural rival, apparently. The Penn State-Ohio State game, which has been played every year since 1993. That's the one that, Iowa getting 3 protected opponents. And UCLA's travel. UCLA will have to travel a ton in 2024 with their new schedule. But, I was talking through this with you last week when it was released, and you brought up that, they got to play USC, Ohio State every year. The more I thought about it, I was like, Ohio State's not going to do that. I mean, they should, but Ohio State's not going to do that. And on the schedule release show, to me, it was very interesting that the first athletic director they had on that show, it was like the order was Tony Petitti, guest, he talks. Who's the next guest? It wasn't a coach. It was Gene Smith, who to me is, as far as football goes, probably the most influential voice in the room. Ohio State's athletic director. So I still would have gone with I still think the most logical model for a 16-team conference is to protect 3 opponents and play the other 6 alternating years. That way you can play, once every 4 years you're at every stadium. Still think it's the model that makes sense. And then you take a school like Ohio State, for example. You get Michigan, Penn State, and you give them somebody like Illinois, who Illinois, Ohio State probably doesn't mean much to you, Bill, but they play for a turtle. It's weird. It's a historical rivalry, and the Big Ten's got a lot of those that people are like, well, what? Who cares? Well, they play for the Floyd of Rosedale. What's the Floyd of Rosedale? It's a giant pig. These things are important up here. So, and USC and UCLA, I think with the travel, you can all for these other schools, they alternate going out there, and you try to avoid a nightmare for like a UCLA where they're traveling 2,500 miles.
Yeah, I just think it's a joke that Ohio State and USC are not playing every year. I just think you have to do that. You have to give these networks what they want. And it's $7 billion over 7 years, and these 3 national networks are giving you. You need to give them back USC, Ohio State every year. And I don't know if it'll play for the strength of schedule and the CFP and this and that, but they're the class of the Big Ten West Coast division of 2, taking on the class of the Big Ten of the last 10 years, Ohio State. You've got to play them every year.
But not the class the last 2 years. That's why you can get away with them alternating Michigan and Ohio State to me, because you're right. You have a point, but Michigan USC is the more frequent Rose Bowl matchup. It's probably the more frequent Rose Bowl matchup in the last 30 years, honestly, because I know they played a couple times in the 2000s, and Ohio State's been the more successful program than Michigan the last 15 years, but you can sell Lincoln Riley, Jim Harbaugh for the next 10. You'll do okay on those ratings next year. So,
so they'll alternate every year. They'll play either Ohio State or Michigan.
Yes. So I think that's a decent workaround. Plus, you can tease they're going to want a Big Ten championship game with USC and Ohio State. Some combination of USC, Ohio State, Penn State, and whoever, Wisconsin, Nebraska. And, UCLA got the weird end of it. This is where they play Ohio State and USC, or at least the first couple of years. They're going to play Ohio State and Michigan in 24, and then they play neither in 25. They get neither school in 25. So I get what you're saying. Yeah, like you would want to sell USC, Ohio State every year. But to me, if they're going to – how's that fair to Ohio State at a certain point where it's like you have to play USC, you have to play Michigan, then Penn State's going to be sitting here like, hey, dude, we've been here since 93. Why are you giving USC preferential treatment when I would argue, Bill, that in the last 10 years, Penn State's been a more notable program than USC. Last 10 years.
Right. And I think Penn State should at least have one of the two as a permanent.
That's a shocker to me, is that they didn't give them
Michigan or Ohio State.
They're huge. When I do those lists every year, the number 2 game on the list or number 1 is typically Penn State, Ohio State. So like, whereas you're arguing USC, Ohio State, I would actually argue I'd rather see Penn State, Ohio State every year. What'd you build that 30-year rivalry for now that it's a weird situation for Penn State. It really is. And I think they've earned it. They've earned Big Ten status. There's a generation of fans that have enjoyed those games. I enjoy when Penn State plays Michigan and Ohio State. There's some rivalry between Franklin and probably less so than with Day, but there's been some combative moments with Franklin and Harbaugh. It's enjoyable. So taking that off the table was definitely a weird thing.
Yeah. And so we'll see. We'll see how the SEC shakes out eventually. It is funny that the Big Ten finally settled, and they came up with a new solution. Really, I mean the SEC is stuck on 2 models, and then the Big Ten out of the blue kind of came up with a third, which was
little overthinking, I think. But again, like they protected the rivalry games that there was one bizarre one. Well, you know who else was happy is Maryland and Rutgers, because they don't have to get their butts kicked by Ohio State, Penn State, and Michigan every year, and they could probably build their program a little bit. I always joke, one of the first things I look at on the Big Ten schedule, Bill, is Maryland and Rutgers. I always look to see, because the Big Ten schedule makers are clearly sadists, that sometimes those schools will get Michigan and Ohio State back to back, and I'm like, whatever that second game is, they're going to get destroyed. The first game they may do okay, but they just, typically that second game they get destroyed. So it's good for them in some ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, all right, let's return to Troche Trivia. What year was the college football playoff field? All 4 teams had been there at least once.
2020, right? It was Clemson, Ohio State, and Notre Dame and Alabama. And I was just, Notre Dame was kind of tripping me a little bit, but then I remembered their first playoff game went very poorly against Clemson. So 2020, for all the things that I don't want to remember about the COVID year, that's one thing I remember. The playoff was actually set up pretty well.
I know you are very, very good with college football playoff history over the last 10 years. I did not think I was going to get you on that one, but that was the best kind of I could come up with. I was really looking at the history of the college football playoff, and I did notice this was something interesting because I heard today that the last 5 NBA finals have featured 10 different teams, which I thought was interesting. The college football playoff has not had consecutive years with 8 unique teams, if that makes sense. So 4, and then the next year 4 different teams. A team has repeated an appearance every year. At least one team has gone 2 years in a row every single year.
You know what a fun exercise would be, and I may just go do it after we get off here, is if you called the CFP championship game something cool like the Super Bowl, which is taken, but if you're like, it's the Mega Bowl or whatever, and you compared the first 9 years, as you could tell people, is I'm so good at college football playoff history, I had a typo yesterday where I thought it was the 9th year instead of the 10th year. But if you matched up the first 9 Mega Bowls versus the first 9 Super Bowls, I wonder what it would look like, because those first 9 Super Bowls, it was like Green Bay and then a lot of Dallas and a lot of Pittsburgh and Miami. But it's different in Miami. And, you know, so its first 9 years of this has been a lot of, you know, how many has Alabama been in? They've lost 3 and they've won 3. Mm-hmm. So they've essentially been in 6 Super Bowls in 9 years. So yeah, it needs some variation. Like you said, the 12-team playoff may contribute to that. It may not. These next couple years after this year are going to be a lot of interesting experimentation for I think even on the schedule, which we just talked about for 15 minutes, that the first couple years of the 12-team playoff are going to be very interesting to me on every level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's going to be great. So, all right, I think that's all we've got for this week. Thanks again to everyone for listening to the CFB Nation All-America podcast. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we will see you next week.